pneumophila. And this scene is going to be about a legion of World War I style battleships. And the one we're focusing on is being prepared for battle. So we'll call this drawing the SS Sistine Joins the Legion. As we're drawing the ship, you'll notice that we've made it red and rusty. Well, this is because technically Legionella is gram-negative. However, it really doesn't take up gram stain all that well. And in order to visualize it, you need to use a silver stain. And just like Legionella needs a silver stain, so does our ship. We can't have it going into battle looking red and rusty. It needs a fresh coat of paint, and silver paint. So this should remind you that Legionella is technically gram-negative, but needs a silver stain to be visualized. And we'll leave this smokestack here yet to be painted over so that you remember its gram-negative origin. So we decided to make these battleships from the World War I era for one important reason. This was the last era where we used coal-powered battleships. And this is important for our Legionella story because it'll help us remember the auger requirements for Legionella. It needs to be grown on buffered charcoal yeast extract in the presence of cysteine and iron. So we'll draw heaping piles of coal to help you remember the charcoal yeast extract. Okay, now we have to remember cysteine and iron. Well, iron to me seems like a pretty natural association with old ships. You know, old Ironsides. Nonetheless, let's draw an iron anchor. And next to it, we'll have the name of the ship, the SS Sistine. We also threw cysteine in the title of the drawing since naming the ship SS Sistine is a slightly weaker memory hook. But even so, I really think you'll have no problem jumping on Legionella right away if you hear iron or cysteine added to auger. Now let's go into the clinical features of Legionella. Legionella causes two diseases that we need to know. Legionnaire's disease, which is a very serious and potentially fatal illness, and a less severe disease referred to as Pontiac fever. So let's cover Pontiac fever first. It's characterized by fever and malaise and is usually self-limited. So to represent this, we'll draw this old car on the left with the hood open and steaming. This car is meant to look like an old Pontiac, and the steam coming out from under the hood should remind you of Pontiac fever. Now I'll go over the more feared disease, Legionnaire's disease. So first, Legionnaire's disease more commonly occurs in smokers. So we'll draw a sailor smoking a cigarette. Legionella is one of the atypical pneumonias, as are Mycoplasma and Chlamydophila pneumoniae. And on chest x-ray, Legionella characteristically demonstrates a patchy infiltrate with consolidation of one lobe. We'll represent this unilobar infiltrate by having the sailor holding up a blueprint of the ship's layout. He's looking for where the cargo is stored. Notice how on the blueprints we have two levels of the ship laid out next to each other, oriented vertically? Well, we tried to make these look like lungs, and the cargo storage is highlighted only in one section of one level of the ship, or one lobe of the lungs. However, the X-ray is nothing to hang your hat on for diagnosing Legionella. It's highly variable and could easily look like another type of pneumonia. However, Legionella does have some unique characteristics in its clinical presentation that will easily help you distinguish it from the other two atypical pneumonias. The first characteristic is that Legionnaire's is associated with hyponatremia. So how do we represent hyponatremia? We'll have this sailor moving a big pile of salt onto the ship, but as he's traversing the gangplank, the wheelbarrow tips and spills salt into the sea. So he's wasting salt. And this should make you think of hyponatremia. So if a question stem describes a pneumonia and it gives you all or part of a basic metabolic panel, train yourself to look at the sodium level. If it's less than 130, you should feel pretty confident in thinking it's Legionella. However, they'll probably also give you more clues than just that, one of which could be that the patient's a smoker, and the other clues we'll cover next. The first, a patient with pneumonia who is also experiencing neurologic symptoms, usually a headache with confusion. We'll have this guy who's painting the ship accidentally knock a paint can off of his bench, and as it's falling to the ground, it hits the head of the sailor below. This sailor's clutching his head in pain, which will represent headache and the neurologic symptoms. The other additional symptom that should make you think of Legionella is diarrhea. For board's purposes, if you hear pneumonia with diarrhea and hyponatremia, that really is sufficient for you to go ahead and pick Legionella. So it's really important that this is a strong association for you to remember. So in our story, not only does the painter knock a paint can on the sailor's head, but his brown paint got all over this other sailor's pants, making it look like diarrhea. Finally, the last symptom to remember is much less specific, but patients with Legionnaires often present with high fever, often greater than 40 degrees centigrade or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And in our story, in order for a coal-powered ship to work, someone has to scoop coal into the furnace. His close proximity to the hot flames are causing him to look feverish and sweaty, and this will remind you of these high fevers. So now let's say we have a clinical presentation of a smoker with pneumonia, hyponatremia, diarrhea, headache, and confusion. So all of the alarm bells are going off, and we're thinking, uh-oh, this might be Legionnaire's disease. What lab tests do we run? Of course, we definitely want to culture the respiratory sputum because that's the most definitive, but that can take 3 to 5 days, and we don't want to wait around that long. So luckily, there's a rapid urine antigen test. Though it isn't quite as sensitive, it still is definitely used. So to help you remember the urine antigen test for Legionella, we'll draw the sailor here, urinating into the water. So now we have the clinical presentation and the laboratory diagnoses down. But how do we treat Legionnaires? Just like the other atypical pneumonias, you can treat them with macrolides. So we'll draw our macrolide crows here, hanging out and observing the commotion. Now macrolides would be a correct answer, but fluoroquinolones are actually suggested to have fewer complications when treating Legionnaires than macrolides, and they're equally as effective. So I really want you to also remember fluoroquinolones as the treatment. You may have noticed we've already included this fleur-de-lis on the smokestack, which is a flower symbol, to help you remember fluoroquinolones. But just to further solidify it, we'll have a sailor handing this girl a real flower. This symbol we've used many times before to represent fluoroquinolones, and we'll do it again now. And lastly, Legionella is oxidase positive. Sorry to wait till the end to include this identifying feature, but we really wanted to give the ring to this girl. So here it is, the oxidase positive blue ring. And that's all for Legionella. This is definitely one of my favorite in the series. Learn it, and it'll definitely suit you well.